So today on 40K Tech Talk, I don't really have that much to talk about, so I figured I'd just go on even longer about how broken the new Tyranids and Crusher Stampede are, and... Hold on, what is that? Is that the dulcet tones of Space Wolf's Bad Santa coming from his frozen northern fortress to give us a sick list to talk about? Hell yeah! What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be talking about some more Hammer 40K Tech Talk. A nice holiday season 40K Tech Talk, because we have an absolutely wild Space Wolves list to cover that 5-0'd a GT up in Canada this past weekend. Let's get into it. As always, on these videos, we're going to talk about the event in question that was won, the list that won it, and all of the matchups that list played, so we can break down the journey that it took to going undefeated at the tournament. This was the 2-day winter tournament run in Montreal, Canada, this past weekend, and I'm going to apologize beforehand. I am not a native francophone, so I am going to butcher some name pronunciations today, so if you're a French speaker, I sincerely apologize. The event had 29 players. There were originally more signed up, but it had a bunch of drops last minute that did allow it to crest right over the cusp of being a GT. But last minute drops were pretty much a staple of the past weekend, especially given the holiday season where people have holiday plans that may change last minute, or inclement weather conditions can delay people's attending events, which makes events that weekend before Christmas a pretty tough one. That said, still getting 29 is pretty good, and had an interesting meta breakdown. A very balanced breakdown of factions, if I do say so myself. We did have 6 Space Marine players, including 2 Iron Hands and 2 Space Wolves, as well as a Black Templars and a Salamanders, 2 of each Adeptus Mechanicus, Necrons, and Tyranids, and then the rest of the metagame was pretty widely distributed around a bunch of other factions. Interestingly, however, no Drukhari at this event. The number 1 faction in the game right now, not making an appearance, which definitely helps those beleaguered Space Marine players win some additional games. Now, I couldn't find too much information about this event. They did post the first 3 missions that were going to be played, and then post that the semifinals and finals mission would be determined day of on that Sunday, which means that I don't, unfortunately, have the last 2 missions that were played, but we can talk about the first 3. The winning list that we're going to cover today is Mathieu Bouton-Bastien's Space Wolves, and this is an absolute doozy of a Space Wolves list. It's so far off the wall, I am so excited to cover it. This is pure Space Wolves, a single battalion detachment, and we're not getting into any of those successor chapters. No Whirlwind of Rages, no Hungry for Battle, no Master Artisans. Pure, honest to the Emperor Space Wolves. It starts with the Primaris Lieutenant, bringing Aura of Majesty as well as Armor of Rust for that delicious fight last. This is the Space Wolf specific Primaris Lieutenant who's bringing the special issue Bull Chiron as well as a Mastercrafted Power Axe. I actually talked about this guy in my ranking of all of the Primaris Lieutenant profiles, and I did rank him as number 1 if I remember correctly, because the combination of melee and range profiles that this guy can bring with a 2 damage 2-shot bolt gun as well as that 2 damage power axe is chef's kiss of the Primaris Lieutenant selection. We also have backing him up a Primaris Captain with a Power Fist. He's bringing Rites of War and the Vox of Spiritum. So the additional range on all those aura abilities, giving him a large range on that objective secured aura, as well as a large range on his reroll 1's Rites of Battle aura. That's being followed up by just a wild troops allotment. 5 units of 5 Assault Intercessors. We're going Horde mode today, ladies and gentlemen, with this MSU style Space Wolves list and throwing a bunch of individual 5-man Primaris OBSEC units onto the table just to sweep those objectives away. That's being compounded in the Elite slot with a unit of 5 Blade Guard veterans. They are going to be sitting next to the Primaris Captain, giving them objective secured from that Rites of War and backing him up. We also have a Judiciar buffing the people around him with the Wolfenstone, and Saga of the Hunter to allow him to advance and charge and project that fight last ability even farther up the table. The Judiciar has some particular synergy in a Space Wolves detachment because they can use the stratagem Countercharge to give anything in the army a 6-inch heroic intervention. It's free for characters, and the army innately has a normal 3-inch heroic intervention on every single unit, characters included. That does mean that you can use that Justiciar to sit in the center of your horde of melee units. If anything comes within 6 inches of him, he can use that 6-inch heroic intervention to get within 3 inches. Then, at the start of the fight phase, trigger his Tempora Mortis to make you fight last and ruin your day. That's in addition to the Armor of Rust that we also have the Primaris Lieutenant, and this is one of the reasons that Space Wolf's control of the fight phase is so powerful, because you have multiple instances of those fight last abilities, meaning it's very difficult to engage into them profitably, and they can mess with your interrupts if they're engaging you, meaning that even if you're deployed defensively, you're still going to have to eat attacks from all of these Primaris units before you're able to attack back into them. Now, things get a little crazy here, because with that Justiciar, we also have 5 Veteran Intercessors, a unit that I have never seen in a list ever. Essentially, for just 2 points a model, we'll get an additional attack out of those guys, and if they're sitting next to that 9-inch Rites of Aura from the Primaris Captain, you're not going to necessarily lose that objective secured that you would have if you are a normal Intercessor squad. Following that up are 3 units of Wolf Guard with some varied and very interesting weapon loadouts. We have 1 bringing Astartes Chainswords and Power Fists. No Storm Shields today. We're just going all in on the offensive attacks. That means that each of these models is going to make their 3 base attacks with their Power Fist on the charge, then get the additional attack from the Astartes Chainsword to give them a little bit of attack volume, and definitely pumps up the strength of the unit if you're going into high toughness targets. The second unit of Wolfguard is equipped with 1 Storm Shield, but the majority of the unit is going to have Astartes Chainswords and Thunder Hammers, giving them access to that additional damage. The +1 to hit on the charge is going to help shore up the hit rolls of these Wolfguard units, because then they won't necessarily be quite as impacted by that -1 to hit that their melee weapons are giving them. On top of that, this list also relies heavily on the Keen Senses stratagem, which is used in the shooting phase, but allows a unit to ignore any charge roll, hit roll, ballistic skill, or weapon skill modifiers until the end of the turn. That means that in your shooting phase, despite the fact that these guys are probably not doing very much shooting, you will be able to spend that 1 CP stratagem on them, and throughout the rest of that fight phase, they are going to ignore the -1 to hit penalty that they would have for those Thunder Hammers or Power Fists, meaning that you get a bunch of attacks and multi-damage at high strength, hitting on 2s thanks to that Space Wolf's +1. That's followed up by a 3rd unit of Wolfguard, also with jump packs, these ones each, with 2 Astartes Chainswords. This unit will make an absolute boatload of attacks to each model swinging 5 times, and because it's only 5 models, and this goes the same for all of these Wolfguard and even Assault Intercessor units, they are going to be eligible for a 1 CP Savage Strike, giving them +1 to wound on the charge. For a unit that makes so many attacks, this is pretty sweet. That's followed up by 3 individual Cyber Wolves in the fast attack slot, one of the best utility units in the entire game of Warhammer 40k, although their usefulness is going to be diminished significantly in GT 2022, since they will no longer be able to score engaged all fronts. Objectives like Oaths of Moment that allow Cyber Wolves to score it just by standing wholly within 6 inches of the center of the table through the end of each battle round will still make these guys pretty useful. In addition, just having a bunch of individual models to stand on objectives, give yourself another model who can hold down that objective in case your big objective holders or your OBSEC units are shot to death, or just screen out wide areas of the table, is absolutely worth the 15 points that Cyber Wolves bring. They're so good, and they're also the goodest boys. That's followed up in the heavy support slot by 9 Eradicators, 1 unit of 6 with 2 multi-meltas, 1 unit of 3 with 1 multi-melta. These guys, again, are going to be making use of that Keen Senses stratagem to be able to ignore the penalty to hit using those multi-meltas while they're moving. You can even use the outflank stratagem to bring them out on different table edges, not using the normal strategic reserve rules, meaning they could be popping out of your opponent's battlefield edge or even within their deployment zone on the top of turn 2, ignoring the penalty to hit, and then just ripping apart big, heavily armored targets with that mass of Melta Rifle and multi-melta shooting. Space Wolf heavy weapon units like Eradicators and Long Fangs are absolutely phenomenal with those heavy weapons because of the ability to ignore the move and shoot penalty with those big guns, and this list is certainly making use of that ability to its fullest extent. Overall, this list is absolutely wild. It is definitely a dedicated melee horde. And for all those Space Wolf players out there, I know there's going to be some people who are upset that it doesn't have too many Space Wolf specific units, but if you want to play the most quintessential Space Wolf list, this might be it. It is putting a ton of infantry on the table and is ramming those infantry directly into your opponent's face. It's going to use the Space Wolf's control over the fight phase in order to get its models into interesting positions and make it extremely difficult for your opponent to get ahead on primary objective scoring. You can use abilities like the universal heroic intervention that the army can perform, meaning that every single one of these 5-man tiny Space Marine units is going to be able to move 3 inches at the end of your fight phase if it's within 3 inches of any enemy units, which can potentially allow them to get additional distance onto objectives, stop your units from moving onto objectives, just engage you with multiples of individual infantry squads or characters, and really muck up your day. In addition to that, stratagems like Relentless Assault, giving you a 6-inch consolidation move instead of the normal 3-inch consolidate move, means that getting these tiny objective secured units all over the table is going to be an absolute nightmare, since as soon as they're engaged in melee, they're going to be moving potentially 9 additional inches in order to go and touch your objectives. On top of that, we have fight phase manipulation abilities like the Armor of Russ and the Tempora Mortis from the Judiciary, who are going to make it extremely difficult for you to be able to interrupt or attack profitably into this army and clear out these little units. That's backed up by the powerful anti-tank from the Eradicators as well as the Wolf Guard, and pave the way for those intercessors to drive directly into the heart of your home objectives and stop you from ever scoring any primary objective points. This list is going to be super finessey and super technical and super Space Wolvesy. So let's talk about the games that it played and the opponents that it fought against. In round 1, Mathieu was paired up against Stéphane's Adepta Sororitas. This is a relatively standard Adepta Sororitas list, mixing Bloody Rose with Argent Shroud heavy weapons teams. That Bloody Rose gives those Close Combat Sisters squads an immense buff to their offensive power, and we see that including 2 units of Sisters Repentia as well as 2 Zephyrim squads. In addition, we also have the fast-moving heavy weapon squads in the Argent Shroud detachment, bringing 2 units of Dominions to jump into transports alongside 2 units of Retributors to give them some additional threat range by moving those transports 6 inches at the start of the game. Now, this was on Surround and Destroy, which is a mission that tends to favor, or at least penalize less, armies that are MSU-oriented and are able to spread out across the table. This means that a Space Host list like the one we're talking about here is going to be a little bit benefited. In addition, Sisters tend to excel against armies that concentrate their power in single, very expensive, heavily armored units that they can target down with their Retributors or their Repentia squads and absolutely vaporize. The Space Wolves list doesn't have anything like that and is able to actually trade into this Sisters list with, Intercessor squads eating attacks from Zephyrim or from those Repentia, and then either using their Fight Last abilities to stifle that attack or attacking back with another unit of Assault Intercessors or Wolf Guard to clear out those offensive troops from the Sororitas. This plan apparently worked very well because we did see Mathieu take it down to an 82-40 victory. That brought us to round 2, where Mathieu was paired up into Guillaume's Necrons. This is a relatively standard Necron build, bringing a relentlessly expansionist and eternal conqueror's custom dynasty alongside the Silent King to give those nice new core keyworded buffs to everything in the army, not just the little infantrymans. We have a big brick of Necron warriors as well as a brick of Scorpec destroyers and 3 units of Canoptic Scarab swarms as well as some additional immortals and Locust heavy destroyers to hold objectives and fill out some backline shooting. This was on Retrieval mission, and interestingly, I do think that this may be a little bit Necrons favored, because the Necrons do have that universal objective secured on their entire army, which can essentially counteract the objective secured that the Space Wolves have on theirs. The downside is that their fastest units in this Necron army are going to be those Canoptic Scarab Swarms, and those are not particularly resilient units. So while they can move up aggressively and break banners and contest defensive objectives that the Space Wolves are relying on, the downside is that the Space Wolves units will be able to kill them relatively quickly. They'll have to contend then with the big Necron Warrior brick as well as the heavy destroyers and the backline shooting, especially from the Silent King, but clearly Mathieu was able to do that, taking this game down 88-55. That brought us to round 3 against Jordi's Necrons. Necrons again, but this time a fully Saracen detachment, which is not something that we've really seen competitively very much at all. The Saracen subfaction bonus gives the Necron army a universal 5+ damage ignore roll against mortal wounds. That's very good, especially if you are looking or expecting to run into a meta full of things like Thousand Suns and Grey Knights who are able to output a lot of mortal wounds in their psychic phases. In addition, that gives you access to the 4+ deny stratagem and a Master Artisan style reroll every a Master Artisan style reroll every attack activation. This list also has the Silent King and Being Sarikhan that actually turns on a couple synergies between the remainder of the list and the Silent King itself, most notably being able to repair the Silent King with your Technomancers, although I don't believe the list actually included any Technomancers. This was on Vital Intelligence, a super duper swingy mission that basically could go anyway, but apparently came down to a very close game, 79-73, for Mathieu. That put him into the semi-finals on day 2. Round 4, Mathieu was paired up into Vincent's Imperial Knight, specifically a Freeblade Lance, and a style of list that we've been seeing doing very well in competitive circles thus far. This list is bringing a Castellan for some backline shooting, as well as 2 Megaras to do some mid-range and 3 Armiger Warglaves to contribute some objectives secured. The downside of this list is that I think as soon as those Armiger Warglaves get taken out, the massive amount of objectives secured that the Space Wolves army is bringing is going to quickly overwhelm those knights on their objectives. But the Knight Megaras do have the Sworn to Equest Freeblade quality that does give them objectives secured, and since they do count as 10 models, they are able to hold down objectives, but that Knight Castellan is not. So as soon as whatever objectives that Knight Castellan is camping on get towed by any of these objective secured Space Wolf infantry, they're going to be taking that objective. And since the Armiger Warglaves, especially if they play a little bit too aggressively, are going to be taken out relatively easily by the Astartes Chainswords, the Assault Intercessors, and Wolfguard squads, those heavier weapons can focus on the Knight Megaras and take them out, allowing the swarm of objective secured infantry to start grabbing those objectives away from the Knights player. Once those Knights get taken down, things start going very poorly for the Imperial Knights, and we can see that made manifest in an 88-24 score to Mathieu, putting him into the finals game. This one against another Vincent, this time playing Iron Hands. This is a fairly standard Iron Hand successor chapter build using Whirlwind of Rage and Born Heroes to basically emulate Space Wolves as much as they can. That's including 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, a Relic Contemptor Dreadnought being upgraded to be a character with March of the Ancients so it can be untargetable either through Lookouts or from Bodyguard from the unit of 2 company veterans that are in the list. We also see some utility units as well as some long-range shooting from a Devastator squad, 3 units of Vanguard veterans with Lightning Claws to make use of those melee buffs, and some Landspeeder Storms, alongside Eliminator squads to complete some non-combat secondary objectives. I made a video about Fushini's list, which is, I think, almost exactly this one, very close. So go check that out if you want to hear me and Fushini talk about how this list actually works, because it is a well-oiled machine, as befits an Iron Hands army. Unfortunately, wasn't well-oiled enough to defeat the wrench that these Space Wolves were able to throw into its works, as Mathieu took this game down 95-71, taking down the entirety of the event and winning the winter tournament. So congratulations to Mathieu for taking it down with, I think, what is generally going to be considered a relatively off-the-wall Space Wolves list, and one that I think really encapsulates Space Wolves as a faction. There are a lot of more defensively oriented and a little bit more memey Space Wolves lists that also do well competitively. We see Wolf bots get played relatively often, as well as some more aggressive or utility-oriented lists. We saw Jaime Perez do relatively well at the recent FLG Louisiana tournament, using a Master Artisan style build that focused on combi meltas and dealing a bunch of melta damage, but nothing like that for Mathieu. He's just purely taking a bunch of chainswords and he's going to run across the table and hit you with those chainswords and steal your objectives, which, you know what? That's a game plan I can get behind. Super cool to see Space Wolves continuing to do well in the competitive circuit, and also super cool, I think, to see the metagame of this event. It's definitely pointing towards 40k moving very slowly towards a healthier metagame, where we see a broad distribution of factions rather than them being concentrated in just a couple super overpowered factions. We're seeing Necrons see more play, obviously Imperial Knights, Space Marines, in addition to the normal staples of Adeptus Mechanicus, Orcs, and Drukhari. Tyranids now, obviously close to my heart, getting a bunch of buffs as well to come out of the woodwork and see some play, and hopefully we see some love given to the other factions that haven't really seen much play in 9th edition in the next coming weeks with their new codexes that are being released. Anyway, that's all I have to say about this cool Space Wolves list. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Big thanks as well to my patrons over at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise. Also, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers, all those people help me keep the lights on over here in the Tactical Tortoise studio. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy holidays!